Just moments ago, Buckingham Palace delivered a devastating announcement. King Charles and Prince William have jointly confirmed heartbreaking news about Princess Catherine's condition. For months, the public whispered and speculated, but no one could have anticipated what was finally revealed today. As the nation holds its breath, the royal family is confronting a truth too heavy to hide any longer. In a rare moment of unity and vulnerability, the king and the future king stood side by side as the official statement was released, both men visibly carrying the weight of what they were about to disclose. For a palace known for its composure and discipline, this was unlike anything we've seen in years. The words were soft, but they struck like thunder. Catherine's condition has taken an unexpected and deeply alarming turn. This wasn't a routine update, but longtime royal watchers knew better. This family never lets silence linger without purpose. And yet, after the initial announcement, days slipped by with nothing. No updates, no reassuring statements, no discreet photos of William visiting the hospital. Not even a carefully staged image of Catherine meant to calm the public. Instead, the royal family disappeared behind iron gates, leaving the world with nothing but rising questions. And with every day of silence, concern grew heavier. The press, normally relentless in their pursuit of any royal movement, found absolutely nothing. Paparazzi, who had camped outside every hospital and palace entrance, failed to capture even a distant silhouette of Catherine. Her medical team, usually willing to give broad, non-detailed confirmations, refused to speak at all. Whispers turned into unease. The pressure intensified when Prince William began abruptly canceling events with almost no explanation. Charity galas, military ceremonies, official engagements. He vanished from them all. And on the rare occasions he did appear, the strain was written across his face. Insiders later revealed that aides had been instructed to clear his calendar indefinitely. Quietly, discreetly, without announcing anything to the public. This was no longer routine recovery. Something had gone terribly wrong. Inside the palace, fragments of truth began slipping through cracks. A royal aide was overheard muttering about unexpected complications. Another was said to be trying to contain the fallout. Still, the palace clung to its message. Privacy, healing, space. But to the outside world, that space began to feel like a smokescreen. Then came the first leak. An anonymous staff member at the London clinic reached out to a foreign journalist with just 4 chilling words. "It's worse than they say." Once published, that single sentence ignited a global firestorm. The palace refused to comment, but the mood had shifted. Mainstream outlets, usually cautious with royal matters, began questioning the official narrative. Why were there no recovery photos? Why had William retreated from public life? And why had Catherine, whose role was defined by visibility, warmth, and connection, simply vanished? Behind the gates of Windsor and the corridors of Kensington, the truth loomed larger than any press release. This wasn't about controlling optics anymore. This was about protecting the family from a reality they could barely process themselves. As the outside world pieced together the scattered clues, a darker, more sobering picture formed. This wasn't a delay in healing. It was a shift in the royal story, one marked not by elegance and duty, but by fear, fragility, and uncertainty. And as the veil of secrecy began to thin, one thing became painfully clear. Prince William was no longer playing the role of future king. He was a husband in crisis. Friends say he stopped sleeping, barely speaking, struggling to hold himself together. And for the first time in his life, he faced a problem that could not be solved with diplomacy, protocol, or palace strategy. This wasn't a scandal to manage. It was something far more human, and far more heartbreaking. This was the one person William couldn't protect. And that truth crushed him. The pressure had become unbearable. Every quiet moment inside Adelaide Cottage echoed with uncertainty. Every unanswered question from the public felt like a personal failure. For a man trained his entire life to remain composed, to uphold tradition, and to shield the crown from chaos, William now found himself overwhelmed by something far stronger than duty: helplessness. His days blurred into emergency consultations, tense conversations with doctors, and long nights spent staring through dark windows, searching for any sign that things might turn around. What frightened him most wasn't what he saw in Catherine, but what he didn't. Her once unshakable spirit had dimmed, replaced by a deep exhaustion that even their children's laughter couldn't lift. The silence in their home, normally filled with warmth and noise, felt colder than winter. But William's breaking point didn't come from Catherine's illness. It came from the palace's refusal to tell the truth. Senior advisors, still focused on controlling the narrative, kept withholding critical updates. They argued that public stability depended on secrecy. They warned that revealing the severity would spark panic. They emphasized optics, strategy, and long-term image. But to William, it was painfully simple. This wasn't about the monarchy. This was about the woman he loved, and the dignity she deserved. Behind closed doors, arguments grew heated. Aides insisted the public couldn't handle the truth yet. William countered that the public deserved the truth, that Catherine deserved transparency, not silence. Finally, in a moment that stunned even King Charles, William sent his father a private email. The subject line was only 5 words. "She deserves more than silence." The email was raw, emotional, and impossible to ignore. And when it inevitably leaked, it set off a media storm. But by then, William didn't care. He was done with staged photos, carefully crafted statements, and illusions of calm. He no longer trusted the palace machinery that seemed more concerned with perception than with humanity. Quietly, he began speaking to a handful of trusted journalists, dropping hints, challenging the official line, letting them know that the truth was far darker than anyone realized. His frustration became visible, in the tightness around his eyes, in the curt tone of his voice, in the way he walked out of meetings without looking back. Then, in mid-March, everything changed. Catherine's condition took a sudden and devastating turn. Doctors altered their entire course of treatment. Tension inside the palace thickened, and a chilling realization spread through the inner circle. This wasn't temporary. This was something far worse. The future Queen of England was in genuine peril, and the institution's instinct to hide the truth had now become its greatest liability. Then, just when it felt like the uncertainty couldn't deepen any further, King Charles made a move that stunned the entire palace. For decades, Charles had been defined by restraint, careful with his emotions, measured with his words. But when it came to Catherine, all royal subtlety vanished. During an urgent gathering at Clarence House, he reportedly slammed his fist against the table and said, "No more hiding. Let the world know." He had watched the palace retreat into silence. He had watched advisors cling to a narrative that no longer resembled reality. And most painfully, he had watched his son deteriorate under the weight of fear and helplessness. And with that single moment of defiance, the palace's strategy changed forever. The breaking point came during Charles's private visit to Adelaide Cottage. Sources say he emerged a different man after just 15 minutes at Catherine's bedside. For someone who spent a lifetime perfecting the art of royal composure, this moment shattered the mask. When he left Windsor that evening, witnesses described his face as drained, his hands unsteady, and his entire demeanor burdened by a truth he could no longer cushion with protocol. What he saw was not a princess in recovery. It was a mother locked in a silent fight for her life, while the future of the monarchy quietly hung in the balance. Behind the gates, tensions erupted. When Camilla urged caution, suggesting they release only a carefully worded update, Charles cut her off. His answer was sharp, final. "This isn't about optics anymore. It's about her." For the first time since taking the throne, he overruled every senior advisor. He demanded full transparency. No euphemisms, no softening, no palace spin. The room froze. Some feared the truth would spark panic. Others believed it would restore dignity. But Charles was unmoved. In that moment, he wasn't the king. He was a father-in-law watching a family unravel in silence. And then something no one expected happened. This decision, this blunt, human, unroyal decision, brought Charles and William back together after weeks of quiet estrangement. The tension between them, fueled by fear, grief, and clashing instincts, began to thaw. William, once frustrated by his father's distance, saw something different now, a man finally letting himself feel. The two began working side by side, reviewing drafts, rewriting statements, rehearsing what would become one of the most emotionally charged announcements in modern royal history. Every line was weighed. Every pause calibrated. Because the truth they were about to share wasn't simple, and it certainly wasn't complete. What the world didn't know, what even the family had only recently pieced together, was the true extent of Catherine's suffering. Her decline hadn't come out of nowhere. It wasn't sudden. It was the consequence of something far more insidious, something overlooked or worse, ignored. As the cameras were being positioned and the nation braced for answers, insiders revealed the chilling secret buried inside her earlier medical reports. The cancer wasn't new. It did not begin this year. Confidential documents show that warning signs appeared long before the public sensed anything was wrong. Late in 2023, during an ordinary health screening, doctors reportedly discovered irregularities in Catherine's blood work, markers that shouldn't have been there. At first, those anomalies were dismissed as inconclusive, but follow-up tests in December intensified concern. By then, pain had already woven itself into her daily routine. She was thinner, more exhausted, yet still determined to carry out her royal duties. Even as doctors urged her to scale back, Catherine pushed forward, attending events, hosting meetings. Catherine continued working, attending engagements, filming segments for her early childhood initiative, showing the same radiant composure the world had come to expect. But behind that steady smile, she was fighting a silent, exhausting battle that only a handful of people truly understood. According to staff, she collapsed twice during private engagements. Once at a charity dinner. Once behind the scenes at a Royal Children's Hospital visit. Both incidents were covered up with surgical precision. Guests were calmly told she'd developed a migraine. Security ushered her out before anyone could react. No photos leaked. No whispers escaped the rooms. But inside the palace, the alarm was deafening. William had seen the truth long before these collapses. He had watched her body weaken, her appetite fade, her energy drain away. He begged her to stop, urged her to step back, to let the doctors investigate without interruption. But Catherine, ever the symbol of steadiness, refused. She believed she wasn't just a royal, she was a constant, one aide reportedly said. And constants don't falter. Let me work while I still can. People need to see something steady. Her resolve was iron. But her body was growing fragile. And it was that brutal tension, duty versus deterioration, that began to terrify the man who loved her most. Behind the scenes, decisions were being made that would later haunt everyone involved. Senior aides, already grappling with the king's own health concerns, argued that revealing Catherine's condition would plunge the monarchy into crisis. Two major figures sick at once would shatter the illusion of stability. It would raise questions about succession, continuity, and the future of the crown itself. So, in the name of national calm, the diagnosis was buried. Catherine agreed at first. She was told it was early, manageable, something that could be treated quietly. But the cancer didn't wait for palace optics. It advanced quietly, quickly, and by the time the institution was ready to face the truth, it had already spun out of control. Even the most loyal staff began questioning the silence. Doctors voiced concern. Advisors whispered guilt. But no one could undo the delay. The damage had been done, not only to Catherine's health, but to the fragile trust between the monarchy and the people who believed in it. William, torn between duty and love, began distancing himself from those who insisted on secrecy. The crown had gambled on silence. And it had lost. But amid all the PR calculations, the withheld updates, and the crumbling facade, no one foresaw what Catherine herself would do next. With no warning to the press, no approval from advisors, Catherine made a decision entirely her own. She filmed a video. Raw. Unfiltered. Shot in the garden where her children once played. In just 94 seconds, she shattered the decades-old barrier between monarchy and mortality. There was no palace staging. No polished statement. No royal gloss. Just Catherine, pale, steady, holding herself together as her voice trembled through the truth. She began by thanking the public for their patience and kindness. But it was her next words that froze a nation in place. She confirmed the rumors. The surgery had revealed cancer. She was undergoing preventive chemotherapy. Her composure held, but behind it was the unmistakable weight of someone who had looked directly into the abyss and chosen to speak anyway. She didn't share details of the diagnosis. Instead, she spoke of family, resilience, and the need for privacy. But for those who listened closely, there was something else beneath the surface. An unspoken story, a deeper truth, a quiet storm gathering just beyond the frame. There was a quiet farewell tucked inside every word Catherine spoke, an unspoken ache, as if she were gently preparing the world for a possibility she herself could barely bring to voice. The reaction was instant and overwhelming. Within minutes, the video detonated across the world. Social media feeds flooded with reposts. Translations appeared in dozens of languages. Talk shows broke format to air it in full. Body language experts and royal analysts dissected every blink, every breath, every tremor in her voice. Hashtags supporting Catherine surged to the top of global trends. Presidents, prime ministers, actors, athletes, and pop stars issued messages of solidarity. Outside Kensington Palace and Windsor Castle, candlelight vigils sprang up without a single organizer. Just strangers gathering in grief and hope. People cried together on sidewalks. Because in that moment, it wasn't about royalty. It was about humanity. A mother. A wife. A woman standing in the center of a storm. Choosing truth over tradition. Her vulnerability didn't weaken the monarchy. It cracked open its cold surface and revealed something painfully, beautifully real. But behind the scenes, the emotional toll was far heavier. William, who reportedly didn't know the exact timing of Catherine's announcement, was seen visibly shaken during a school visit later that afternoon. When a young student innocently asked how Catherine was doing, William paused. He looked down, turned away, and for the first time in his public life, he broke. He wept in front of a crowd. Journalists were stunned. And in a rare show of compassion, the press chose not to publish the footage. Even they understood. This wasn't a headline. It was heartbreak unfolding in real time. And with that moment, everything changed. The monarchy, long shielded by centuries of tradition, had been transformed. It was no longer about crowns, protocols, or bloodlines. It was about survival, suffering, and the human cost of silence. Catherine had done what no royal had dared. She stripped away the formality and exposed the fragility beneath it. And in doing so, she didn't just earn sympathy. She earned devotion. But while the world was united behind her, the palace was thrown into turmoil. Because Catherine's honesty left the institution facing questions it wasn't prepared to answer. As she rested, the palace war room ignited. Who would step forward if she couldn't return? Who would protect the children from the tidal wave of attention? And who would the public look to if the princess they trusted most never reappeared? Behind closed doors, alliances cracked. Agendas surfaced. And not every royal voice in the room had Catherine's well-being at heart. The days after her announcement were a strange mix. Quiet admiration from the outside world, quiet panic from within the palace walls. While the public rallied, the monarchy was forced to confront the unthinkable. The possibility of losing its most stabilizing figure. Catherine wasn't just a modern royal. She was the thread holding together a fractured, fragile institution. And now that thread was fraying. Behind thick walls and centuries-old curtains, a new conversation stirred, one so unthinkable that only months earlier it would have been dismissed as treasonous. In hushed, trembling voices, senior aides began asking the question no one wanted to speak aloud. If Catherine doesn't return, who steps forward? The very idea sent ripples through the royal ranks, ripples that quickly turned into quiet political currents. Camilla, long accustomed to wielding influence from the shadows, reportedly hinted at stepping into more visible ceremonial roles. Those within her circle saw an opportunity. Sympathy was sweeping the monarchy, and a familiar, steady face might seem like the institution carrying on. But the suggestion landed poorly. Very poorly. Princess Anne, whose respect for Catherine came not from glamour but from grit, acted immediately. She and Sophie, Duchess of Edinburgh, formed an unwavering front. The two women took their concerns directly to Charles, arguing that any attempt to fill Catherine's place, even symbolically, would be interpreted as betrayal by both the family and the public. And, blunt as ever, allegedly warned, replace her too soon, and you won't just lose support. You'll break the monarchy. Yet tensions only sharpened. Behind every closed meeting room door, two realities clashed violently: loyalty versus logistics. And at the heart of it stood William. He refused, flat out refused, to discuss substitutes, stand-ins, or redistributed roles. He knew the pressure was rising. He knew the monarchy required continuity. But to him, acknowledging a backup plan wasn't strategy. It was surrender. And he would not surrender Catherine. Not now. Not ever. Advisors attempted reason, insisting the public would demand stability. But William's answer was icy, gut-deep, and final. She's not gone. Still, the pressure kept mounting. With no updates released to the public, aides argued over strategy. Should they share a progress report to calm the nation? Or would that ignite a fresh wave of scrutiny and speculation? The palace communications team froze, caught between protecting privacy and preserving control. Meanwhile, contingency plans formed in the shadows. Alternate schedules, temporary patronage transfers, quiet restructuring of royal duties. Every document was drafted discreetly, but none of it escaped William's notice. And through it all, one chilling question echoed through every corridor of the royal institution. If Catherine doesn't recover, what becomes of the monarchy's credibility? Could the royal family survive losing the one woman who had unified the public without ever trying to? Would anyone, be accepted in her place? The strain was unlike anything seen in modern royal history. Alliances wavered. Trust thinned. Unity slipped between fingers like sand. And then, just as it seemed the family was on the edge of fracturing under pressure, fear, and spiraling uncertainty, everything began. And then, something no one saw coming shattered the tension that had gripped the nation. Just as the public began preparing themselves for the worst, another statement appeared. But this time, it was from Catherine herself. Her words were careful, tender, and edged with fragile hope. With a quiet steadiness, she revealed what many had been too afraid to imagine. The cancer was in remission, a miracle wrapped in caution, a victory shadowed by uncertainty. Her message was brief but deeply human. Catherine thanked the public for the flood of compassion that had carried her family through the darkest months. She spoke of resilience, of faith, and of the strength she pulled from William and the children. Strength she desperately needed when nights felt endless and fear felt louder than hope. Then, with soft pride, she shared the news that sent shockwaves through the world. Her treatment had worked. The disease was dormant. For now. The word remission swept across the globe like a wave of collective exhale. Headlines called it a blessing. Communities held spontaneous celebrations. Millions cried tears they'd been holding back since the moment she disappeared from public life. And yet, beneath the joy, there was restraint. Because Catherine didn't announce a triumphant victory. She announced a fragile milestone. Her tone wasn't celebratory. It was grounded, reflective. She acknowledged the immense toll the illness had taken, on her body, on her spirit, and on her family. Her voice, steadier than before, still carried the echo of a woman who had stood at the edge and survived by sheer will. She reminded the world that remission isn't an ending. It's a pause, a breath, a chance to rebuild. Medical experts echoed her honesty, explaining that remission requires vigilance, that the path ahead would demand care, balance, and patience. Inside the palace, that truth settled heavily, but not hopelessly. William was reportedly overjoyed, but fiercely protective. He insisted that Catherine's return to public life be slow, cautious, completely on her terms. For the first time in years, he pushed back against royal protocol, and Catherine, wiser now to her limits, agreed. She began appearing quietly, away from cameras, visiting hospitals she adored, supporting early childhood initiatives, attending small gatherings that didn't drain her strength. But even in these brief glimpses, the public noticed the change. She was thinner, more delicate, her usual glow softened by the long shadows of recovery. And yet, she smiled. She stood. And that alone reignited a hope that had been flickering dangerously low. One moment in particular captured the world's heart. At a private school function, Catherine arrived holding the hands of her children. It wasn't an official appearance. It wasn't meant to be seen. But it became symbolic, an unspoken declaration that life, however fragile, was still moving forward. Parents described her as gracious, gentle, and visibly moved by the warmth around her. She focused entirely on her children, determined to give them normalcy in the thick of chaos. But even with the relief of remission, even with her steps growing steadier, a new question began forming in the minds of those watching closely. Was this the beginning of Catherine's return, or the beginning of a new reality she would have to navigate forever? Remission may have lifted the nation's spirits, but inside the palace walls, tension clung to every corridor. A question no one dared to say aloud hovered like fog. What if it comes back? What if this fragile window of peace was only temporary? And what would happen if the monarchy had to stare down the unthinkable all over again? Even as Catherine rekindled hope across the country, those closest to her knew the truth. Light had returned, yes, but the shadows had not left. And then came the decision that would shake the monarchy to its core. While the world celebrated the smiling princess they saw on their screens, the royal family braced for one final shift. With King Charles and Prince William quietly preparing for transitions that were once distant hypotheticals, the palace finally acknowledged what had long been unsaid. The future no longer came with guarantees. One thing had become undeniable. Catherine's strength had redrawn the boundaries of royal life itself. When the final public address was delivered, there was no spectacle, no triumphant symbolism, just a solemn, heartfelt moment. King Charles, standing beside his son, spoke with a gravity that resonated far beyond the palace gates. Her courage, he said, had reset the monarchy. Those few words changed everything. What generations of tradition and ceremony failed to accomplish, Catherine achieved through her resilience. She stripped away the distance, the formality, the myth of invincibility. In its place, she offered authenticity, raw, human, and impossible to ignore. Behind closed doors, the institution shifted. Protocols once carved in stone were rewritten. Advisors drafted unprecedented contingency plans, not just for the passing of a sovereign, but for a future queen needing time to heal. Roles softened. Expectations changed. The monarchy could no longer cling to the illusion that its members were untouchable. Catherine's battle had exposed the truth. Behind the grandeur lived human beings, vulnerable and mortal. But her legacy stretched far beyond policy changes. It reshaped the moral heart of the monarchy itself. Mental health, once treated as a polite side topic, became central. Catherine's lifelong commitment to early childhood development deepened with new meaning. Her quiet visits, her handwritten letters, her steady advocacy, all became part of a broader movement to build empathy into royal service. No longer was duty about showing up. It was about showing up honestly, scars included. And perhaps the most profound impact was on her children. George, Charlotte, and Louis. The world no longer viewed them as symbols of continuity, but as witnesses to their mother's fight. They saw what royals rarely reveal: fragility, bravery, and the price of silence. Insiders whispered about letters Catherine wrote to each child during her darkest hours. Sealed, stored away, meant to be opened only if she never returned. Never confirmed publicly, but the very idea of their existence reshaped her legacy once more. A mother preparing her children for a world without her. Catherine didn't endure her struggle quietly. She transformed it. She gave pain a purpose. And now, as she cautiously returns to public life, she isn't seen as a princess holding onto her crown. She is seen as a woman who walked to the edge, stared into the unknown, and chose to fight. Her journey is far from over. But her strength has already carved a new path for the monarchy. The world will never see her the same again. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and we'll see you in the next video.